Happy Sunday afternoon brunch show. You getting hammered there? You got a cocktail?
Yes.
Hell yeah. That's the way to do it.
It's time. It's time. What is it? 1 o'clock in the afternoon this
I
afternoon? We're
I
good.
can respect that. Special brunch episode with Guy Swann. And before we delve into the detail of the global elites trying to retake over the entire world under one global economy, under a currency that probably won't be Bitcoin, I got to shout out YoDelta.com, home of, well, not the $6 kilos Yo Delta, but Yo Delta, I mean, Yo Kratom. Yo Delta, you go there, you get yourself some gummies, eat it, and then you go, fuck, man, the socialists are coming for my money. So go load up. Promo code RYM, you get 20% off. Mr. Swann, it's been a long time.
Yo.
How's that kid coming? You still like it?
He's still yeah. He is wildly entertaining. He's getting to that point where he has this extreme motivation to move around and he wants to get places, but he still can't do that yet. Um but it's hilarious to see him he just wants to touch and explore everything.
It's amazing the boring shit that parents can enjoy about their
It's
own
so much
kids.
fun. It really is so much fun to see somebody like experience something. Like just like looking at his hand. He's just
Right.
just like what is this thing?
And
It's great.
figuring it all out. And are you thinking
Yeah.
about having more kids just in case this one turns shitty on you? Because that's why most
Yes,
parents
that's
do it.
exactly the reason because we got to hedge our bets.
Yeah.
It's like an investment. You got to have a backup plan.
Yeah.
But yeah, me and my wife were talking about it just yesterday. Actually, this is how many kids are we gonna have to hedge this bet in case
Right.
Rad turns
What do
out
you
to be a
need?
total disaster.
What do you need? What do you need Bitcoin to be at that you can be in the market to produce another kid?
Oh man, that's a good question. And at least back to 60,000. At least back to 60.
Like at 60, I can afford another one. At 10, I'm gonna have to sell this one.
That's about right. It's somewhere in there.
All right, so before I do really want to get into the World Economic Forum, but before we do that, the FTX scandal, I'm convinced that the government was in on this, that this was the preferred player, that they were looking to work with them, and that either it was a intentional blow up that happened too early, that it didn't happen on their timetable, and they were hoping to take out more of the crypto universe in a need for regulation. Or this was just the people that they were going to work with kind of on digital currency and, working with the preferred platform. I give it to you as more information within the crypto space. What do you think was going on there? Am I being too conspiratorial here?
No, I originally thought you were, or I would have thought that position was.
Right.
Like right when it blew up, my thinking is welcome to crypto.
Right.
Like this is not new. This is something that we've seen over and over and over again. And when you run, basically almost the entirety of the crypto space outside of Bitcoin looks to me, their practices, the culture, everything about it is taking the fiat financial system, taking the culture of the VC Silicon Valley cheap debt, endless money stream, and taking those practices and trying to apply it to crypto, trying to apply it to the Bitcoin ecosystem. So it's inevitable that it blows up in their face. It like we saw this from the very beginning with Mt. Gox. You can't run fractional reserve in Bitcoin. And what they did to get around the apparent fractional reserve in this era of the maturity of the ecosystem was just a different kind of fraud. Rather than explicitly running fractional reserve, they created just a nonsense token that had no liquidity whatsoever. And then you can wash trade that token. So if your FTX, Alameda owned FTX created a token of their own. Like they created an FTT token that they print for free, and then they sell They sell to people for money. And then Alameda owned like 75% or 80% of the entire outlying supply. And when they do they can basically trade with themselves. I mean, imagine I issue 1 billion tokens tomorrow of just Guy Bucks. And then on my own exchange,
you put 10% of them in the market. Yeah.
Yeah, I put a tiny portion of them in the market, and then I buy them for $1. Well, then suddenly I have $1 billion valuation. Suddenly I have $1 billion that I can leverage against. And that's what they did. That's what they did. They said the majority of their backing was their own bullshit FTT token. And so they had the appearance of we're not doing fractional reserve, but they were just taking customer funds and just doing whatever the fuck they wanted to do with them. So it's just fraud. It's just like slightly more obscured fraud. Like, I mean, it's not really a whole lot different than what Enron did. They just did it with tokens instead of like subsidiaries. Like
Right.
they just
But
hid the fact that they didn't have the money.
I think
And they did it behind an illiquid token.
I think what dooms it, though, is that fractional reserve banking with the backing of the Fed, with large enough institutional players, you'll get a bailout. I mean, it's
You
literally
get a bailout. You
designed.
just
Yeah,
loan more money into existence. You can't do that
exactly.
with Bitcoin.
It is
You can't do it.
designed for bailouts. That's why BlackRock pension funds just got a bailout. It is designed for it. That's the design. But you leave the traditional banking hemisphere and you start running the exact same scams without the Fed bailing you out, well, then it will fail. It doesn't matter if
Yeah.
it's a 5 or 10. And you and I might look at the Fed system and go, that's going to fail at some point too. But that might be 100 years from now, might be 150
Yeah.
years from now. When it comes to the world of crypto, if we're engaging in fractional reserve banking and we're leveraging off of earlier assets and leveraging off of that, every 5 to 10 years, there will be a massive blowout. That will, like,
Yeah.
it's literally inevitable, which has converted me back to your stance, which is, hey, Bitcoin's great. Literally everything else in this entire sphere, probably don't touch it. Unless
Yeah.
someone can actually explain to me the utility of like one of these, like I understand the value of a shitcoin if there's like something that actually is being like, because shitcoin can exist in a way very similar to equities. Like it can exist where instead of like doing an IPO, you're basically funding with your coin. But it's like then you need to have a product that admit like that you actually produce something that does something. But if
Yeah.
it's just the coin with nothing tied to it, then you will like it's inevitable. There's no value.
So there's two things. The first thing you were talking about was the difference between the Fed and like a Bitcoin
Yeah.
ecosystem. Is so essentially what they and the reason it might blow up in 100 years, but we just don't know when, is because they've essentially socialized the downside in the fiat economy. Because what they've done is they've taken the ability to do a bank run away by essentially printing the currency to fulfill any bank run. And then they've publicly stated, we've eliminated the fragility and we've the unsustainability of fracture of irresponsible banks, right? We've just saved everybody. But what they've done is they've just moved the problem. They've scaled the problem like an order of magnitude, and they've moved the problem from the individual bank run to a currency run. This just goes on until the currency dies, and you have so much bad behavior and so much irresponsibility and so much leverage in the entire system because you've changed the culture of finance. You've fundamentally changed every player's behavior because the only way to be profitable now is to just margin up like crazy and get as much of the new flood of money as possible so that you've outbid everyone else in the economy so that you're the one that can actually buy up the assets when the shit storm comes back into full blown spray of fecal matter through the air current generation machine. So it's turned a bank run problem and a bank fragility problem into a currency run and a currency fragility problem, which means that we take everyone down with us. Bitcoin has turned it back into a bank run problem. It has re-decentralized the fundamental architecture, and that's why you can have a couple of bad, scary tweets and reveal some information about FTX, and then in 4 days, the whole thing blows up because people just like, I want my shit back. I want my Bitcoin, and then they run out. They just run out, and that's ultimately why Bitcoin works. Like why Bitcoin is fundamentally going to change everything because this behavior is going to get punished instead of rewarded. In Bitcoin, you are going to get clobbered. You are going to be slapped upside the head every single time you think you can get away with fractional reserve. And everybody who trusts the person who says, don't worry, we got it sorted out. We're back with FTT tokens and blah, blah, blah. Everybody who embraces that culture is also going to get punished. They're technically the victim, but their behavior should change too. You should stop doing business with thieves. You just have to. We either mature our way out of this or this just keeps happening. But luckily in Bitcoin, it's going to force it to keep happening until we learn. But we got a lot to learn because we got 70 years of horrible behavior and business practices and deep financial irresponsibility and recklessness to beat out of the population with monetary losses, basically.
This is something I said recently on the show, but it ties in. Is there's something incredible to me when it comes to a platform like FTX, where a single tweet that has information in it can actually bankrupt a platform. Whereas you
Mhm.
look at something like COVID policy, where a tweet could have more accurate information than the official narrative, but it doesn't deplatform the official narrative. Which,
Yeah,
if we did not have fractional reserve banking in the Fed and endless money
it
in these
could.
institutions, then it actually could. It
Yeah.
could be that if like some information came out that an institution that we all trusted for, like, imagine if the FDA was actually publicly funded by like a Bitcoin, where everyone who wanted the information from the FDA had to contribute, let's just say $1 a year or whatever the fuck it was. And then we
Mhm.
found out that they actually gave a preferred player, granted their thing as opposed to someone that we would defund it. We would all just pull our membership, which we don't really have an option for. But it's so interesting to see that when it comes to something like finance, a single piece of information like a tweet can literally erode billions of dollars in value because it didn't actually exist. You can actually
Yeah.
expose it.
Yeah, it just reveals you take the curtain off and
Right.
they can't prop up the illusion. Because you can actually see and you can withdraw back to reality when it comes to Bitcoin. You can't do that with the currency with fiat.
Right. All right. So now let's move on to Carl Schwab in the World Economic Forum. Now, for a while, I was somewhat ignoring it because I guess the conspiracy side of the news didn't really interest me as much
Mhm.
as like what I could tangibly see, and when I mean tangibly see, it would be like um, regulatory capture. It would be things like, fractional reserve banking in the Fed. It's like I could be looking at the tools. It didn't really matter what was going on in the back room that was getting these things to happen. I could just look at these things and go, well, this is what's happening. So let's just stop what they're, you know what I mean? It's like,
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
don't need to see the chess player. We could just be like, all right, let's throw out the fucking chessboard. Why are we letting someone play these games? I now see what's going on with the green energy push and a push away from economic development from I can just see it. I can see it with BlackRock and ESG scores that preferred players are trying to rig the market where you don't have to compete, you don't have to create value, and so that essentially they're going to get paid on investments that otherwise wouldn't be profitable. And it's going to be at the expense of all of us. It's going to be at the expense of growth. The FTX thing, I look at it and I just go, okay, these are the preferred players. They're trying to come up with their scandals so that they can continue to run the banking system. Like I can just see it. And now it's becoming more and more evident by the lack of any criticism of this economic forum guy who's a foreign entity that for some reason him and Bill Gates get to make these and by the way, the FTX guy is a good example. He's still going to be speaking at some New York Times thing. He's still
Deal
getting
bookers.
favorable coverage. It makes no sense. The guy's literally a thief. I don't
He's being
understand. Yeah,
he's being portrayed in the media as someone who wanted to save the world and it just didn't work out.
right. And so we should
The
still hear him
fuck?
out. It was just a simple error because he was in over his head. And if we can just give him more money and more power, he might figure out the new scheme to make money that he can just give it to charity. Bullshit. But that's the new thing. That is the new sale of, hey, look at how charitable we can be if we engage in stakeholder capitalism and we reorganize. So I'll hand it back to you just because I don't even know where to start researching. We're in like a new media landscape where things just get buried. It's like you get two narratives. You get the official narrative, and then you get people on Twitter going, I call bullshit. That doesn't make sense. And then a leap to whatever. I mean, the Nancy Pelosi story is a good example of that. It didn't really make sense that some guy just broke into their home. The idea that Paul's with gay hookers, I don't know. You know what I mean? There's like
Yeah.
or you take the Epstein story. Doesn't make sense that he was hung. I mean, that he killed himself. But to say that,
Mhm.
he was recalled by Mossad or someone came in and killed it. We don't know. You know what I'm saying? It's like official narrative
Yeah.
doesn't make sense. And then we just do conspiracy leap. So you look at the Carl Schwab guy in a culture that should not be embracing socialism, should not be embracing other world powers wanting to make decisions for our government, should not be looking at green energy over carbon usage and economic growth. Like all of these things should just be simple. but he
Mhm.
seems to be getting favorable coverage. He seems all the world leaders are there. They're shaking hands. And I don't even know who the fuck the guy is. It's like, who is he? Where did he come from? What the fuck is this organization? Why do they have any power? What are they pushing? And what are the odds that it actually comes into fruition?
So the World Economic Forum is an interesting thing. You know, it's really hard to pick out the facts from the fiction. And there's a degree of legitimacy to the conspiracies, to the more elaborate, ridiculous conspiracies, in the fact that most of them make more sense than reality, or than reality, than the truth, quote unquote, than the narrative that is being pushed. There are so many inconsistencies and contradictions in essentially the story we're supposed to believe. And I think that's why some of these conspiracies just run rampant. Now, I think there are a lot of competing interests. Actually, I had a really great conversation. The very last episode that I published on the show, we kind of
Plug
dig
it. Name
into
of
a
the
lot of
show.
this. Bitcoin Audible. Bitcoin Audible. The last I did an interview with Matt Hill. He's the CEO of Start9. And we kind of started out talking about like self-hosting and like digital sovereignty and just like the tools, because they have like a new product that I'm kind of jazzed about. But
What's to self-host your own media?
um, self-host my own chat rooms, wallets, like payment process. Like it's just basically encompassing everything about like the Bitcoin node and then turning it into your entire communication life so that you're running off a device that you own and it stores your information. But there's a lot to go into, but we kind of get technical in like the first 45 minutes or so. But after that, we just kind of like generally talk about the state of the world. And he uh said something that I think is deeply in line with what you were just saying, is that it's so difficult to understand what the hell is going on and to make sense of fact from fiction because we're in the fog of war. This is why they call it the fog of war. We are in a war. There are a massive number of competing interests. They are all competent in some regard, and they are all deeply incompetent in another regard. And they're all clashing because things are changing aggressively. Now, the World Economic Forum has despite the fact that there will undoubtedly be, you think about any organization with power, there's fighting within the organization, right? So the WEF started in 1971, which should be the most prescient thing to tell you about where this is headed. If you've ever, the WTF happened in 1971, like the
I, I,
the
I,
meme, the thing.
I mean, I've heard that that's when he published his first book and started the World Economic Forum.
Okay, well, WTF happened in
You mean the World Trade Fair?
1971.com.
Okay.
Go to that website, WTFhappened in 1971.com. It's basically tracking so many statistics and details and trends in the US, and some I think are even like world statistics, because 1971 is when we officially went off the gold standard. We
Okay.
lost even the slight tether to the restrained by sound money element of our monetary system, and we went full fiat. And I think it is not even slightly a coincidence that the World Economic Forum was created at the same time. And essentially what this institution is, or how it started, it's basically a collection of the wealthiest people and the most powerful politicians get together and they talk about the plan for the world. And which on its face is so deeply arrogant. I could not imagine a group of people that are more disconnected from the reality of the population than this group of people. And simultaneously, I couldn't imagine anyone more arrogant and more influential in directing the future and believing that they are obviously the only ones with the solution. And really, probably for like the first 10 or 15 years, it was almost more of a let's get together and stroke each other off and talk about how great we are and have a big vacation. And then they started getting into, sometime in the 80s, they started getting into public policy and inviting more politicians. And I think it was like 87 or something that they actually had the president of Luxembourg there as their opening speech. Like they just got into like, we need to fix the world. It's time that we take all of our collective
But
influence and we solve everybody's problems.
I have to interject and just go, to me, any language of we're going to fix the world is propaganda
Yeah.
for, hey, we got to make sure that we're controlling critical industries and that it like they don't want open markets. Open
No.
markets and freedom means new competitors. It means decentralization. With decentralization and podcasting, I've already said that it's one of the best examples of decentralization. It used to be you got one or two places where you could get news, and those were the only people who got to make money off the news. Now
Yeah.
I'm able to make money doing my own news show. That
Yeah.
exists because of the decentralization of media and the ability to put out content. That will happen in more industries. They don't want that. They want everything as centralized as possible because the more centralized it is, the less that they need to compete in order to make money. It's really that simple. It's one simple theme. Uh, and so
Well,
yeah,
you think about it, this is a lie that everyone tells themselves.
right.
So it's not something new. It's just that when you're in a position of staggering power and outsized access to a money printer, that the subtle and constant arrogance of every human becomes a massive systemic problem when you create an organization like this. Like, it's natural for me to think that if I had more control over things, things would be better in the things that I had control over, right?
Okay.
So of course they think that. And of course, the less humble they become, the more they are convinced that their control is the solution. And this is where, like, the conspiracy theories, the idea that this is like and I use the idea of conspiracy almost equating it with the word silliness, which is, I think, is kind of how it's become evolved, over time, which hilariously enough was actually a CIA operation. Like, this was part of, like, the MK Ultra and the propaganda machine, was to equate the term conspiracy theory with ridiculousness. Like, so it's mind-boggling to think that this has succeeded, but that this was actually an outcome of government propaganda, and everyone has accepted it, and just nobody knows where it came from or why it evolved that way. This is how much control they've had over the media since the 80s and the 70s. But regardless, using that concept of conspiracy theory, of using their language of it's silly, the silliness falls away because they explain it. They literally explain their goals. Like, it's not a conspiracy, it is an open mission. They openly talk about what they seek to achieve. If you listen to or you read audiobook, but if you listen to The Fourth Industrial Revolution by Klaus Schwab, and COVID-19 The Great Reset, like, and you listen to his talks, like, they're 100%. And this is the other thing too, like, particularly the Fourth Industrial Revolution, is that don't get confused. Look for the ideology underlying it. Like, parse the ideas slowly as he goes through them, because there's a lot of flowery language of, like, everything's getting great and there's so much advanced technology and artificial intelligence and blockchain and machine learning and all of this stuff. But then when you break it down to, like, it's basically flowery emptiness of things are changing, which is, like, great, point at all the things that are changing. But then every single thing has this underlying, but we need to make sure it doesn't get out of control. We need to make sure that it doesn't get used for bad purposes, so we need to control it. And all of their quote unquote solutions are systems of control. And they explicitly say this. The idea of vaccine mandates is a long-standing idea from this organization and from the other, like, the Digital Identity Alliance, like the ID 2020, and like 2016, there was a paper written and distributed through this organization and their systems talking about how immunization will be a great opportunity for digital IDs and a global reputation system. And consider the framing. This is always the framing, and the framing is the thing that should enlighten you, is the thing that should reveal their value hierarchy. It's immunization. And this is, since there's another, I've got like God knows how many links on this. There's another .gov thing about how COVID-19 vaccines present a great opportunity for digital IDs. That's always the hierarchy, is that the digital IDs are the goal. COVID-19 and mandatory immunization is the how. It's the motivation. It's not public health is the goal. It's not digital IDs and a reputation system will ensure public health. It's always implied, and they kind of like throw it in there as their excuse. But the tool of the thief is always deceit. It's always just say something bullshit and pretty to get you to go along with it. But they put at the top of their hierarchy control. Digital ID. How do we get people into this global reputation system? And they've been trying to do it for a decade. It's not new. It didn't just show up out of nowhere in 2020. They were ready. They've been writing papers on it and discussing it forever. And this was their opportunity. This was their glorious moment. And they even hailed Jesus. They even just patted themselves on the back and congratulated themselves for the entire I guess it was maybe 2021, the WEF meeting for 2021, about how great they did in 2020. I can't imagine looking at the state of the world. We obliterated the supply chains. We killed half of small business across the planet. The only people who profited are all of the people in that room whose value went up by 20 or 30% in a matter of like a year and a couple of months. And they're patting themselves on the back. We did such a good job. Look
Is
at how
that
great the outcome is.
is that true that 50% of small businesses were wiped out through Corona?
Yeah.
And
No,
that
not Corona. Not Corona. Lockdowns.
lockdowns wiped out globally 50% of all small businesses?
It was 50% in the US.
Right.
And I know it was worse in I don't know. I don't know if there's a cohesive global statistic,
Right.
but I don't think that's far off the mark.
Right. Well, it's wild some of the things that they say out loud because they clearly are like, hey, this health tracking's huge because we're going to be able to make sure that people get every vaccine. And not only can we do health
Mhm.
tracking, they start celebrating what's going on in China, or they've made loose remarks of that. Like, isn't it incredible with the technology that they have, how well they're able to control their entire population? And then they look at what goes on with all that and like, we might even be able to extend this to carbon.
Yeah.
And I see two sides to this. One, it's the control aspect that they want us to opt into new platforms that will allow them a level of control that they would otherwise lose with technology. And the scariest renditions of this are digital currency that they can remove you from your money at any point in time. And by remove you
Mhm.
from your money, it could just be like I don't know, the same way I can't be on a social media platform, a whole bunch of stores have just decided my money's not acceptable there.
Yeah. Which
Which,
they've already tested in Canada and
yeah.
succeeded.
And
But they just don't have the overarching system to make it simple. They have conglomerate influence over the financial institutions that allows them to they don't want to have to ask. They don't want to have to ask. They don't want to have to send out a memo. They don't want to have to contact people. They just want to be able to do it. I mean, the freaking was it Department of Transport, the Canadian version of the Department of Transportation or something. During the trucker convoy thing, they asked like, "Do we have any tanks?" And she was just like, "Yeah, we'll figure that out. We'll get you some tanks so you can go solve this protest situation."
and
Like
then
they like think about the lack of restraint. Like there was no question. There was no like, should we do this? It was, do we have the tanks and where are they and how do we get them to the truckers to end this?
and then well, yeah, the Canada stuff saw very clearly what they'd like to do and what they're willing to do. And we've
Oh,
even seen it with PayPal,
oh
with
yeah.
them
Yeah.
trying to just create a platform where, hey, if we don't like what you're doing, we're just going to basically take your money.
And it's also important to note too that Canada, um, Klaus has publicly patted himself on the back and talked about how great it is that they have so many leaders around the world, political leaders around the world who are their young global leaders, which get the backing and the support of all of these billionaires and politicians and bureaucrats. So they have this outsized capacity to control the narrative because they control the institutions and the networks that release the narrative, that tell us who can be censored and what filters get into our feeds and get onto our legacy media channels. So they have the very mechanisms needed to get these people in power. But Klaus has openly said, like, I got like video clips from his interviews and things about how Trudeau is a young global leader, and also about half of his cabinet, that they have, quote unquote, penetrated the cabinet, and that he's very proud that the WEF, the World Economic Forum, young global leaders, which is basically, it was described as the most exclusive private social network in the world. It is a private network of billionaire groomed politicians.
Sounds like treason.
Sounds like a absolute shit show.
I mean,
Yes, it does.
it sounds like something out of a movie where it's like Russia's got
It sounds like a
it's
crazy conspiracy born
yeah,
into reality. Like, it sounds like the most absurd sort of like SS police sort of
right. We're gonna
undermining
groom
political systems around the world and not caring about actual citizens and representation of the countrymen. Like, I mean, it just sounds like a global takeover. Like,
right.
and this is open. You know, it's not
We're
a conspiracy. This is just how they describe it.
we're gonna groom world leaders and give them the backing that they need, the funding and training that they need to go get elected, and they're gonna then be in charge of all these countries and vote for our agenda, which is not in the interest of those civilians or the autonomy of that country.
Yeah. And you know, this is their goal. Again, they want to set up global. You know, there's I think an interesting analogy on how to think this and think about this, and why it's also kind of an inevitable outcome of the centralization of our systems. This thinking is the outcome, because again, I think these are very natural, very base human fallacies amplified by the economic control presented with a money printer. The essentially a money printer and finance becoming a tool of politics means that you can direct all of the capital in the world, regardless of your productive ability or innovative capacity whatsoever. You just get blanket access to everyone's capital. You can outbid everyone because you're going to get the debt first. And then they measure their success by profit, which is only real in a free market. But their profit is basically a feedback loop of the fact that they get to invest in the things that they're bidding up in price before everyone else gets new capital. And then obviously they have outsized returns because the value of the dollar is falling after they get it. So it's a self-reinforcing feedback loop, that the things that they invest in, the hard assets that they invest in, and the ownership that they essentially steal through seigniorage, the access to the currency that other people don't have, makes those things the most valuable. And because they're the things that everybody needs. And so they price everybody else out of the market, and then the prices go up. And where everybody else gets hit with 10% inflation, they get hit with 3% inflation. So it looks like they have a 7% return because they got the assets before prices went up. But anyway, so in the extension of that sort of that fundamental problem that is caused by the access to money, you're amplifying this normal human negative characteristic, this normal human behavior of arrogance, of I'm right and everybody else is wrong, of the lack of humility, and you're rewarding it. And in doing so, you get these, what's essentially happening in like our networks and the attempts to create this global digital ID system. And this is where, like in the Fourth Industrial Revolution and the Great Reset, Klaus talks about the solution as these systems of control. And either he's just failing to recognize or just doesn't care that they have all of the same problems. It's just centralizing it. So it's just like I talked about with the moving of the problem in the bank run, is that you could have a single bank fail to fractional reserve. Well, they just make it, they grow the consequences. They don't economically scale the system, they economically scale the fallout of the system. So rather than individual bank runs, you have currency runs, you have country runs, and everyone pays the price, rather than having a market where people, where it's actually responsive to individual values and individual choices. And so it can actually split off, and you can compete with the different courses of action. And then one succeeds and one fails. Everyone fails together, even the proper and responsible course of action. So in that's exactly what they're doing with the digital ID system. So he talks about like the problems with AI and machine learning and blockchain and all of these things, and how what we need to do, like the new thing to scare about that outside of a pandemic is a cyber pandemic now, which makes me think that we're probably going to have a cyber pandemic, because I'm
What if someone
increasingly
hacking all of our shit?
yeah, of hacking the digital infrastructure, like basically having a backdoor or a DDoS, like whatever it is, to get into our infrastructure networks and basically shut down all digital communication for some span of time, which would be horrific. Like absolutely, like the economy would literally grind to a halt. We couldn't even send basic communication. Like our coordination would drop by 99% overnight. And in doing so, you would be looking at a holocaust. I kind of think, depending on your number, we're actually experiencing a holocaust right now as a result of lockdowns, their policies, the fallout, and the vaccine, or the therapeutic experiment that they're forcing onto everybody is not a vaccine.
We might have
And
to leave YouTube now.
yeah, sorry.
No, it's all good. Wait, let's pull it down. Everyone, what Guy just said was not a statement in fact. It was for humor reasons. Obviously, no one believes that. The man's drinking in the
100%
afternoon.
comedy.
And for the rest of this conversation, please join us on Odyssey, Twitter, or Twitch.